We were all raised to believe in a simple formula. If the nation grows richer, the people will grow richer too. If GDP climbs, if the stock market breaks records, if the headlines celebrate prosperity, then life for ordinary citizens must be improving as well. That is the promise built into every speech about growth, every chart of national progress, every political slogan about opportunity. But look closer, and the story collapses. In the United States, roughly 1 in 3 adults cannot cover a $500 emergency from savings. In the United Kingdom, food bank use has surged to record highs, and many working households rely on charity to fill the gap between wages and basic costs. In Australia, the median home now sells for roughly 9 to 10 times the typical household income, locking entire generations out of ownership. Nations are richer than ever, but workers are living paycheck to paycheck, drowning in debt and staring down bills that never end. Adam Smith, writing more than 2 centuries ago, saw the danger already forming. The wealth of a nation, he warned, does not guarantee the well-being of its workers. The rising tide of production can lift profits and expand empires, while those who labor are left behind with nothing but subsistence wages. John Maynard Keynes, watching the devastation of the Great Depression, showed that markets do not naturally correct this injustice. Left on their own, they do not spread wealth evenly. They funnel it upward. They abandon workers in times of crisis while saving the fortunes of the few. And long before either of them, Thomas Hobbes had already delivered the most chilling truth. Law, he said, almost never protects the weak. It protects power, and in modern economies, power belongs not to the worker, but to the owners of capital. So here is the painful paradox. Your nation may be the richest it has ever been. The charts may look glorious. The statistics may inspire pride. But if you cannot cover an emergency expense, if your bills grow faster than your wages, if prosperity always seems to belong to someone else, then you are not sharing in national wealth. You are trapped in its shadow. And this is the story we must confront today. Adam Smith is remembered as the father of capitalism, the man who gave us the invisible hand and the idea that markets create prosperity. But if you stop there, you miss the darker side of his vision. Smith was no romantic about the fairness of markets. He did not imagine that workers would automatically share in the wealth of nations. In fact, he saw the opposite. In The Wealth of Nations, published in 1776, Smith described the position of the ordinary worker with ruthless clarity. Wages, he explained, tend to settle at what he called the subsistence level, just enough for the worker to survive, to raise children, and to keep returning to work. Not enough to climb out of struggle. Not enough to build security. The promise of growth does not change this reality because the forces that set wages are not designed for fairness. They are designed for profit. Smith noted a disturbing pattern. As productivity increases, as nations produce more goods and more wealth, the benefits do not flow evenly. The owners of land, factories, and capital capture the lion's share, while the workers who make the growth possible are left with only marginal improvements. In theory, higher productivity should mean higher wages. In practice, those gains are absorbed by rising costs of living and by the bargaining power of those who own property. This was Smith's paradox of wealth. A nation may grow richer on paper, but the worker may not feel richer in life. Prosperity becomes an image, a statistic, a headline rather than a lived experience. Smith also turned his attention to the law itself. In his lectures on jurisprudence, he pointed out that laws were often written not to protect laborers, but to protect property. Legislators, after all, were usually property owners themselves. Their interest was to secure their estates, their profits, their advantages. Smith did not hide from this truth. He wrote that whenever the interests of the worker and the master came into conflict, the law almost always sided with the master. Here, Hobbes becomes a haunting echo. Hobbes had warned a century earlier that law is the tool of the strong, and in economic life, the strong are those with capital. Workers can organize, they can demand, they can strike, but in the machinery of the state, their voices are faint compared to the voice of wealth. The modern world proves Smith right again and again. Consider the numbers. According to the OECD, since 1970, labor productivity in advanced economies has risen by 60 to 80%. Workers today produce far more per hour than their parents did. Yet real wages, the money that actually buys food, rent, healthcare, have barely moved. In the United States, between 1979 and 2020, corporate profits tripled, but the median wage rose by only 10%. The gap between what workers create and what they are paid has stretched into a chasm. The evidence is unmistakable. The prosperity of nations is not automatically the prosperity of workers. Growth does not guarantee fairness. Laws do not guarantee justice. Smith's insight was not a celebration of markets, but a warning about their structure. He saw that admiration and power would bend toward the owners of capital, while laborers would be left to fight over subsistence. When we look around today, we see the very picture Smith painted. The charts show growth, but households struggle. The nation accumulates wealth, but the people who build it stand in line at food banks. The system, Smith tells us, was never neutral. It was tilted from the start. If Adam Smith showed us that prosperity does not naturally trickle down to workers, John Maynard Keynes showed us something even more unsettling. The market, left to its own devices, does not just fail to lift up the poor, it can plunge entire nations into ruin. Keynes lived through the Great Depression of 1929, one of the darkest economic catastrophes in modern history. Banks collapsed, businesses shuttered, and millions of men and women were thrown out of work. Shelves were full of goods, but no one had the income to buy them. Farmers burned crops they could not sell while families in cities starved. The invisible hand, which was supposed to coordinate supply and demand, had abandoned society entirely. Keynes rejected the comforting idea that markets always self-correct. He saw that markets have no heart, no conscience, and no built-in mechanism to prevent mass suffering. They can produce abundance in one moment and mass unemployment in the next. They do not balance themselves in a way that protects human beings. They balance themselves only in terms of profit. One of his most famous insights was the paradox of thrift. If a single person saves more money, it may be wise. But if everyone decides to save at the same time, demand collapses, businesses stop selling, factories shut down, workers lose jobs. What seems virtuous on the level of the individual becomes disastrous for society as a whole. This paradox revealed a crucial truth. The health of the economy depends not only on production, but on spending, circulation, and confidence. And those elements do not always appear on their own. Keynes believed the answer was intervention. If the private market fails to employ people, the government must step in. Through public works, infrastructure, education, and healthcare, the state can create jobs, pump money back into circulation, and stabilize demand. In his view, waiting for the market to fix itself was like waiting for a storm to stop by wishing it away. Action was necessary, and only collective action through government could stop the spiral of poverty and unemployment. This was not just theory. The policies inspired by Keynes helped rebuild economies after the Depression and after World War II. Highways, schools, hospitals, and housing projects were not just construction sites. They were lifelines, putting people back to work and creating the foundation for decades of prosperity. The relevance of Keynes did not fade with time. During the financial crisis of 2008, when banks threatened to pull the global economy into collapse, governments around the world turned again to stimulus spending. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, The countries that invested most heavily in relief programs, like the United States and Germany, recovered faster, with lower unemployment and less social unrest. An IMF report in 2020 noted that stimulus programs temporarily reduced inequality, proving that intervention could prevent the worst outcomes even in modern economies. Keynes's message was blunt. The market will not save you. It does not care about your family, your health, or your future. It will maximize profits and abandon people if that is where the numbers lead. To wait for it to correct itself is to gamble your life on a system that has no memory, no mercy, and no morality. If Smith warned us that the wealth of nations hides the poverty of workers, Keynes warned us that in times of crisis, the market can strip workers of everything they have. He argued that freedom from despair required deliberate choices by society, choices that could not be left to chance. And so we arrive at the modern dilemma. Productivity rises, profits soar, stock markets break records, but workers live in insecurity. And when crisis comes, the system protects capital first and people second, which raises the question we cannot avoid. If nations are richer than ever, why are workers still living as if the market were their master, not their servant? Smith showed us that workers do not automatically share in national prosperity. Keynes showed us that the market, when left alone, can devastate the very people it depends on. And Hobbes, centuries before, gave us the bluntest warning of all. Law, he said, serves the strong. In the economy, the strong are those with capital. Together, these three voices outline a mechanism of exploitation that is still operating in our lives today. Consider Smith first. Productivity has risen dramatically in every advanced nation. Workers produce more goods, more services, more profits per hour than ever before. By any rational standard, wages should have climbed in proportion, but they have not. Real wages have stagnated, barely moving in decades. The surplus created by higher productivity flows upward, captured by executives and shareholders, not shared with those who created it. What Smith observed in the 18th century remains true. The prosperity of nations can expand while the prosperity of workers flatlines. Keynes then reminds us that crises do not punish everyone equally. When the economy crashes, governments rush to save banks, investors, and corporations. After 2008, trillions of dollars were spent to stabilize financial institutions. Ordinary homeowners, on the other hand, were left to foreclosure. Families lost houses, workers lost jobs, communities collapsed. The market had failed and the state stepped in, but not to rescue the many. It rescued the few who held capital. Keynes would have recognized the pattern immediately. Intervention was necessary, but it was tilted toward the preservation of wealth, not the protection of workers. Now layer in Hobbes. He argued that law is not neutral. It is written by those who hold power to defend that power. In our era, this truth plays out in tax codes, labor regulations, and financial laws. Corporate taxes fall. Capital gains are favored. Meanwhile, payroll taxes remain steady, and labor protections are eroded. The rules are not accidental. They are the result of lobbying, campaign contributions, and political influence purchased by wealth. In this sense, Hobbes's insight is not an abstract warning. It is a daily reality. The legal framework that governs the economy bends toward capital and away from labor. Together, these forces create a cycle of modern exploitation. Workers are more productive than ever, yet their paychecks stagnate. When crisis comes, the safety net stretches over capital, not people. And the laws that might correct this imbalance are written under the influence of wealth itself. The system does not need to conspire in secret. Its logic is out in the open, written in legislation, baked into tax codes, confirmed by bailouts, and reinforced by admiration for the wealthy. Look at the numbers. According to the World Inequality Database, the richest 1% now control more than half of global wealth. That concentration is not a coincidence. It is the predictable outcome of Smith's observation about wages, Keynes's warnings about crisis, and Hobbes's truth about law. It is a system that praises national prosperity while quietly ensuring that most of its fruits are delivered to a narrow elite. And for the worker, the consequences are not abstract. To live in a rich country today often means to live on debt. Student loans to enter the job market, mortgages to secure housing, medical bills that follow even those with insurance, credit cards to cover gaps between paychecks. The paradox is bitter. Nations celebrate their wealth while citizens finance their lives with borrowed money, trapped in cycles of repayment that consume decades. Prosperity at the national level becomes dependency at the personal level. This is the mechanism of exploitation. It does not look like chains or whips. It looks like stagnant wages, rising costs, laws tilted toward capital, and a culture that celebrates wealth while ordinary people scramble to survive. Smith, Keynes, and Hobbes together reveal a truth our headlines conceal. Nations may grow rich, but under the current order, workers are kept poor by design. If this is the mechanism, then the consequences are inevitable. An economy that celebrates national prosperity while draining its workers does not merely shape bank accounts. It reshapes society itself. At the social level, inequality corrodes trust. When citizens see record profits and rising stock markets, while their own wages stagnate, they lose faith in the promise that effort leads to reward. Democracy depends on the belief that institutions serve the people. But when the rules seem written for the wealthy, that belief collapses. Alienation spreads. Workers feel detached from their labor. Citizens feel detached from their governments. Neighbors feel detached from one another. Political polarization deepens. On one side, resentment fuels populist anger. On the other, elites retreat into gated lives, insulated from the struggles of ordinary people. The middle ground shrinks. Every election becomes a battlefield of frustration rather than a debate about the common good. And in the streets, unrest grows. Strikes ripple across industries, from nurses in the NHS to baristas at Starbucks to warehouse workers at Amazon. Each protest a symptom of the same wound. Nations may be rich, but they are restless, fractured, unstable. Now turn to the personal level. The cost of living rises while wages remain flat, forcing many to work 2 or even 3 jobs just to cover rent and food. The dream of retirement fades as older men and women in their 70s take shifts at supermarkets, not because they want to stay active, but because they cannot afford to stop. Families strain under the weight of financial stress. Marriages fracture. Children grow up in homes filled with anxiety about bills, not security about the future. Mental health collapses as depression and exhaustion become the hidden taxes of modern life. What looks like prosperity from the outside often feels like survival on the inside. The glossy statistics of GDP growth and corporate profit conceal a daily grind in which workers trade not just hours but entire lifetimes for barely enough to stay afloat. And in that grind, joy evaporates. Time that could have been spent with family learning a craft or building community is spent instead in commutes, overtime shifts, and endless calculations about which bill can wait until next month. Here lies the cruel paradox. A nation may rank among the wealthiest in history. Its charts may glitter with achievement. Its leaders may proclaim endless progress. But if its people must work themselves into the grave, if they must spend their lives juggling jobs and debts without peace or dignity, then that nation is not truly prosperous. It is simply efficient at turning human lives into fuel for profit. In the end, the measure of prosperity is not how much wealth a country accumulates. It is how much freedom, security, and dignity its citizens actually enjoy. And by that measure, many of the richest nations are failing their workers. They are rich in numbers, but poor in humanity. These consequences are not abstract. They live in the stories of people you could pass on the street, people who work, who try, who follow the rules, yet find themselves trapped in the very system that promises prosperity. Take the case of a warehouse worker in the United Kingdom. He clocks in at an Amazon facility where profits reach into the tens of billions. The company boasts record growth, its founder rockets into space, and shareholders reap enormous returns. But on the warehouse floor, wages are so low that many employees qualify for government assistance. Some stand in line at food banks after 12-hour shifts, moving boxes for one of the richest corporations on Earth. The contrast is brutal. National GDP looks strong, corporate earnings soar, but the worker who powers that machine struggles to put dinner on the table. Or consider a middle-class family in the United States. They have health insurance, they work respectable jobs, they pay their taxes. Then an illness strikes. The hospital stay generates bills that run into tens of thousands. Insurance covers part, but not nearly enough. Savings vanish. Credit cards max out. Bankruptcy looms. The family who did everything right suddenly collapses under medical debt. In the wealthiest nation in human history, they are reduced to begging creditors for more time. Their story is not rare. It is common, repeated in suburbs and cities across the country, each one a reminder that national prosperity does not equal personal security. Now shift to Australia or Canada, where young graduates leave university carrying debts of $40,000 to $60,000. They enter economies that celebrate growth but find that stable full-time jobs are scarce. Instead, they patch together gig work, delivering food, driving rideshare, freelancing by the hour. They are educated, skilled, and motivated, yet chained to debts that delay homeownership, family plans, even basic independence. They are told their nations are thriving, but they themselves feel only exhaustion, instability, and a sense that adulthood has been mortgaged to a future they may never reach. 3 cases: a warehouse worker in Britain, a family in America, a student in Australia or Canada. On the surface, their situations differ. One is low-wage labor, one is medical debt, one is student loans. But beneath the surface, they are the same story. Workers generating wealth they cannot share. Families crushed by costs they cannot control. Young people trapped by debts they cannot escape. These are not exceptions. They are the rule. They are the lived evidence that national prosperity has been severed from personal well-being. And until we face that truth, the gap between charts and lives will only grow wider. If the stories of the warehouse worker, the bankrupt family, and the indebted graduate show us the problem, then the question becomes unavoidable. What is the way out? How can workers in wealthy nations reclaim dignity and security from systems that were not built to share prosperity? Adam Smith gives us our first clue. He never believed wealth alone defined virtue. In fact, he warned against the corruption that comes when society admires money more than integrity. To break free from this illusion, we must stop treating wealth as the ultimate marker of success. A society that worships billionaires while ignoring laborers is a society that has lost its moral compass. The first step is cultural. We must restore respect for the dignity of work itself, for the builder, the nurse, the teacher, the truck driver. National wealth is meaningless if the labor that sustains it is despised. Keynes provides the second step. He showed that markets will not deliver fairness without deliberate action. Left alone, they concentrate wealth and abandon workers in crises. But through collective choices, societies can rewrite the rules. Progressive taxation that requires the wealthy to pay their fair share. Public investment in infrastructure, healthcare, and education that creates jobs and reduces inequality. stronger unions that give workers the power to negotiate fair wages and conditions. Keynes's lesson is that prosperity must be engineered. It does not appear naturally. It requires governments to act on behalf of people, not just profits. And then comes Hobbes, with the hardest warning of all. If political power is captured by wealth, then the laws will always protect wealth. The only defense against this capture is civic action. Workers and the middle class must use their voices, their votes, and their organization to demand laws that serve them. Without that pressure, the system will continue to bend toward the rich. Hobbes reminds us that power yields nothing voluntarily. It must be contested. For individuals, especially those between 40 and 65, the path can feel narrow, but it is not closed. Start by auditing your finances with ruthless honesty. Cut out what Smith would call status consumption, the car bought for admiration, the branded goods purchased for prestige. These are chains disguised as choices. Redirect those resources toward freedom, not display. Second, do not remain isolated. Join a union if one exists. Support civic groups that advocate for fair wages, better health care, or educational reform. Alone, a worker's voice is faint. Together, voices can rewrite the rules. Third, invest in yourself and your community rather than in symbols of wealth. Build skills that cannot be outsourced. Protect your health, because without it, no wealth will matter. Strengthen relationships, because resilience is not only financial, but social. These investments generate returns no market crash can erase. You cannot dismantle the system overnight, but you can refuse to let it define your value. You can reclaim the dignity of your labor, the clarity of your priorities, and the freedom of your choices. And when enough people do the same, the very structure begins to shift. As Smith, Keynes, and Hobbes each remind us, the fight for fairness begins with perception, moves through policy, and ends with power. The way out is not a single step, but a direction, a refusal to accept that national wealth must mean personal poverty. Smith warned that national wealth does not guarantee the well-being of workers. Keynes showed that markets left unchecked can abandon entire nations. And Hobbes reminded us that law serves power, not weakness. Together they reveal why countries can shine with prosperity, while ordinary people remain trapped in struggle. So here is the question. If your nation is richer than ever, but you still live one paycheck from disaster, what kind of prosperity is that? Who is it really for? This video is only the beginning. In the next one, we will go deeper into how wealth and power write the rules of modern life, and how those rules keep workers tied to a system that was never meant to set them free. If you want me to continue this series and uncover the next layer of the exploitation scam, leave a comment below. Tell me you want the next video, because the only way to fight a hidden system is to keep pulling the truth into the light.